Evening. Welcome to the Eclectic Radical. This is Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and today my guest is former congressional candidate and first communist on the ballot in Vermont in 30 years, Chris Helali.
Hi, how's everyone doing?
How have things been going since we spoke last? The last time we spoke, you were still running.
I was still running. Things went really well. I mean, we got 1% of the vote, which is pretty phenomenal for a communist. I mean, we're not even talking about socialist, democratic socialists. We're talking about Marxism, Leninism, big bad Soviet, this kind of stuff. So over 3,400 people voted for me. So that's been phenomenal. We've had a lot of good feedback on the ground. And we've been coalition building with other people who are progressive, socialists, people who are generally dissatisfied with the system. Even former Trump supporters who also found, Trump to just be another swamp creature, and who've looked at us and said, "Yeah, we support a lot of what you want." So
I know of somebody who claims they really like what I'm talking about, who apparently supported Trump the first time around because they really felt like they needed a change, and Clinton wasn't a change.
Mm-hmm.
And then because the alternative was Biden, and as bad as everything was, they just didn't believe in Biden at all, even after the train wreck that was 4 years of Trump.
Oh, jeez. And what a train wreck it's going to be. Get ready. Get ready.
Well, so let's talk about some of that, because, of course, we had what people talked about, the Brooks Brothers riot in 2001. I suppose you would have to call this the Cracker Barrel riot. But a lot of small business people and self-employed tradespeople picking, and not to mention genuine rich people and politicians and cops. Let's not forget those.
And military.
Military, yeah, a whole bunch of interesting mix of people. But I mean, I really think, generally speaking, that these days the Republican Party sort of represents this sort of petite bourgeois anger at the snobby urban professionals. and the billionaires just sort of play that bad feeling between the two parties off to get better concessions from both of them.
No, absolutely. Actually, first and foremost, on the topic of January 6th, I'm still very skeptical as to whether it was like a legitimate riot or insurrection, or whether there was some more nefarious tentacles.
So there's the whole thing does have a sort of Reichstag fire feel to it.
It does. It really does. I have to say it.
In the sense that while people were walking around, you had John Brennan, of course, the former director of the CIA, for those of you who don't know.
That's right.
John Brennan was on MSNBC talking about how we needed to militarize the Capitol, and we needed to pass new tough laws to make sure this never happened again.
Not only that,
while it was still going on.
Absolutely. Not only that, I posted the video, Aaron Mate of the Gray Zone. I told him during the quote unquote riot insurrection, I said, MSNBC Live Now with John Brennan just said Russian disinformation is not the main issue now. It's domestic disinformation, Trump disinformation. So the whole narrative, which started Russiagate, was put forward by John Brennan. At that exact moment, John Brennan brought up a whole new slew of ideas, like you're talking about militarizing the Capitol, but also domestic disinformation. What disinformation? Like legitimate concerns and questions over a variety of issues, ranging from, I don't know, JFK's assassination to 9/11 and on. I mean, are we just
UFOs? Don't forget the UFOs.
Chemtrails, everything. I'm just saying that there are legitimate concerns about what the government has done, what they've been involved in. I mean, just, we posted today the suicide letter that the FBI had sent MLK. Most people were called crazy conspiracy theorists for thinking that the FBI wrote that. And finally, we found out a few years ago in declassified documents, the FBI wrote it.
Yes.
So I'm just saying that this whole thing now of we have to go after conspiracy theorists and domestic disinformation is all very sus to me. It's very, very suspect, because QAnon and Pizzagate and all that stuff was started by people like Steve Pachinik, who had links and were involved and were CIA ops and all this stuff. Was it a big psyop? I don't know. I'm really skeptical about the whole thing. The whole thing just seems so suspicious that it was able not only to take right-wingers, but look at the guy with the horns, some vegan climate activist who ended up going and saying Q sent me. I don't know. It's just strange.
Now,
it's
so
strange.
So the thing you have to remember, this is something that I learned from reading Kim Kelly, because I'm not into that scene myself. Apparently, there's this whole code of symbols that relate directly to various forms of pagan Nazism in this sort of European traditionalist sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
idiots running around in furs with horns is apparently one of the danger signals.
The whole thing is, for me, watching it unfold that day. I was actually outside. We were cutting down a maple tree, and I was told, come in. And we started watching it live. And I thought to myself, this is surreal, because in the summer we saw such a militarized response to the Black Lives Matter protesters, to anti-racist protesters, to protesters calling for demilitarization or defunding the police. And all of a sudden, somehow, these masses of people are storming the Capitol. It felt like a movie. It felt like Hollywood. It didn't even feel like real life. I felt sort of like simulacrum, whoa. Go ahead.
It didn't have that sort of sense of immediacy. It had this sort of peripheral, dreamlike quality to it. Like, what the heck is going on?
It did. It just felt so detached from the reality that we've come to understand, which is an overwhelming police response to protesting. And so for me, immediately, I thought to myself, this is just highly suspect. And then we, of course, as the night went on and then into the next day, we saw videos of police opening barricades. We also saw the opposite of people like that poor, situation where the police officer was caught in between like the huge door that was slamming him and blood coming down from his mouth. And you just thought to yourself, holy shit, some people were the patsies in this situation. I mean, people just got, and you really don't know that they now have uncovered this black guy who was videotaping, and now he said he was a Black Lives Matter activist, but he actually is far right. His father's a major general in the Air Force. It's all messed up.
His brother
is a Proud Boys
MAGA guy.
Yeah, he's an actual leader of the Proud Boys.
And he himself, essentially what he was doing was putting together fake Black Lives Matter protests to make Black Lives Matter look bad.
Exactly.
And now Blue Lives Matter. People who proclaim that Blue Lives Matter have killed a police officer before Black Lives Matter. So the pro-cop movement has killed a cop before the anti-cop movement.
It's crazy to me. And, I cannot help but think that some people in that crowd were there for nefarious purposes, whether they were put up by, I don't know who in the government or what's going on. But let me tell you, I always learned growing up, look at the end result. The end result tells you what happened before. And if the end result was, a Patriot Act 2.0, increased surveillance, literally, these massive tech monopolies clamping down on speech. And the problem is all the quote unquote leftists and people on the liberal right, kind of like that, the liberals who are like advocating for Trump getting deplatformed don't realize that the people who have already been deplatformed and will be deplatformed are Palestinian activists from the global south talking about imperialism, activists from Yemen, from Syria, from Iran, from all these places talking against US imperialism.
Left-wing podcasters who say controversial things. Red Scare got deplatformed at the same time as Trump.
Exactly. So when you look at that, you have to say, in this, I can understand debates about free speech. We get that. But in this country, free speech was always championed by the Communist Party. Historically. Why? Because they knew that if the speech was constricted, they'd come after the communists first.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Well, it's like, and this I've been pointing out to a lot of people on Twitter. It doesn't hurt to point it out on the show too. So In the mid 1990s, we had the Oklahoma City bombing,
of course,
which was white supremacists, and which the people who plot such things will tell you was really the beginning of a major organized fascist movement in this country, with links to cops and the military and Republicans and all the usual suspects. But so they pass in reaction to this. Well, they try to pass. It doesn't pass. They try to pass the Omnibus Counterterrorism Bill of 1995, which was written by Joe Biden, and it doesn't pass. Now, one of the things it included was these really expanded surveillance powers for the local police on the same scale that the Patriot Act gave the feds. If they say you're a domestic terror suspect, and the cops can just camp out and watch you from now until they get tired or decide they're busy with somebody else, and you're ready to actually do something. But because it's obviously, and I hate to go off topic, but doesn't it feel like the FBI stops surveilling someone just before they do something horrible? Because they were surveilling the Boston Marathon bomber, and then they stopped because they didn't think he was a risk, and then he bombed the Boston Marathon.
The FBI knew about a threat to President Kennedy's life and somehow magically decided to do nothing about it. In fact, less security on the route in Dallas. Come on.
Well, no, but it's. I mean, even more recently than that, less controversial stuff than that. It's like the FBI. Well, the saying, because you're right, talking about, I think that people thinking that they allowed it to happen, because I saw this. I think Congressional Dems allowed it. So we do know that Speaker Pelosi said, no, we don't want extra help for the Capitol Police. We know that the Capitol Police chief said to the city police that they didn't want extra help, and that the city police said at the time to the National Guard they didn't want extra help, and that nobody called the National Guard in until things were already happening. So that does make it sound like people were not necessarily trying to avoid a spectacle.
Of course. What is that old quote? In time, don't let a good crisis go to waste. Come on. This is great. See, the thing is we don't have to believe that everybody there was an agent. There's always just a few. All you need is a handful to be the real rabble rousers and instigating and provocateurs. Boom, you have what you want.
Even beyond that, let's take a bunch of things at face value. So Trump rather publicly says, I was cheated and I'm calling on the American people to make it right on the 6th. That was not a secret. The organizing on Facebook and on Parler and on Mastodon, none of this was a secret. This was all happening with remarkable lack of operational security. If leftists were that sloppy, we would all be in prison. Whoever heard of any sort of left-wing planning being that out in the open and that obvious and that telegraphed and something horrible not happening? But no, instead everybody stood down, even though all this stuff was broadcast. So we were treated to the sight of these people roaming the Capitol. Now, it doesn't matter if their intentions and Trump's intentions and all of the Republicans who incited them were exactly as stated. If somebody on the other side decides, this is going to benefit us a whole lot more than it benefits them, we can use this. Let's make it a show.
Let's make it a show. Let's do it. This actually has, I think, revealed for some people because of course then Trump threw them under the bus afterwards in his speeches and things like that, which was classic. I loved it. It was pure gold. And it was basically, all those poor schmucks were the patsies. They didn't even know that they're part of a much bigger machinery that just churns them into ground meat. That doesn't care about them. Trump is a swamp creature like the rest of them. I hope any Trump supporter listening, or anybody who possibly thinks that Trump is somehow against the system. I mean, Trump was like best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, flew on his plane a bunch of times, had a modeling agency. I mean, for all these Q folks out there, geez, I mean, Trump
he was deep buddies with the Clintons. He donated the Bill for president and Hillary for Senate.
By the way, he laughed on CNN on 9/11, basically laughing and joking and saying that his tower was now the biggest in New York.
Yes, I remember that.
What kind of a patriot is
so him talking about other people laughing and joking about it is just a little... But yeah, and so you have this sort of perfect storm where Bill Clinton says to Donald Trump, hey, you should run for president. And Hillary Clinton spends money sort of quietly interfering in the Republican Party to make Trump look good to Republicans. And then Trump wins the nomination. And then Hillary Clinton fails to be anything other than Hillary Clinton. And being Hillary Clinton proves that only Hillary Clinton could lose to Donald Trump. I mean, I think we can all say now for certain now that Donald Trump was only the second worst candidate ever. The first worst candidate ever was Hillary because she lost to Trump.
But God, she was just an awful politician, awful person. Oh my God, war criminal of the highest caliber.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not a big fan, but Noam Chomsky is correct when he says that every president ever, pretty much, or at least every president since, the turn of the century or something like that is a war criminal.
Before that too, yeesh. Oh my God.
I mean, so with Washington, you've got the Battle of Fallen Timbers. So I believe there was an Indian massacre that followed the battle. So yes.
I think most presidents had massacred Native Americans up until.
Of course, no. But I mean, the Fallen Timbers was specifically so that was what was so fascinating about Washington, is because he tried at least to pursue this very hands-off the indigenous people policy, and was essentially pushed out of it by the worst elements of democracy, I guess is what the founding fathers would call it. But they didn't really complain about being pushed. Nobody made any real serious effort to stop or pull back these settlers. And so the Battle of Fallen Timbers happened because it was they had to either leave people hanging, which was not politically viable, or they had to commit our first official war crime under the Constitution.
There you go. And eventually it turned into Manifest Destiny. Let's keep going. Don't even stop. All the way to the coast.
Yeah, there was always an element of that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
It got as slavery, as the people who wanted to keep slavery around felt more under siege. There was more pressure to open up new states because they needed new slave states to feel like they could keep competing and surviving.
Absolutely. And the Senate and all of these, arcane institutions that are a result of that whole debacle and crime, really, against humanity.
Well, the word filibuster.
A filibuster, of course.
Which comes from the pre-Civil War period. From the Spanish nickname given to the people in question, which was filibustero, which basically just meant brigand.
Mm-hmm.
Who were these Americans who went to places like Nicaragua and Cuba and Honduras and tried to take over the country to make
Sounds familiar.
But I mean, it wasn't even that they were an official government-approved imperialist endeavor. They were these little tiny capitalist endeavors meant to overthrow countries the same way Elon Musk might overthrow countries now.
Uh-oh.
And
do I smell lithium?
well, I mean, you know, and Cuba was all about sugar and
of course. Oh yeah.
Nicaragua was all about building a canal. I mean, eventually they built the canal in Panama, but as early as the 1840s and 1850s, the U.S. wanted to build a canal through Central America. And the Nicaragua expedition, where they actually took over the government for a year and a half before the idiot got himself killed. Yeah, it was all about building a canal through Nicaragua for Cornelius Vanderbilt.
Oh, all those great names that now, you know, are emblazoned on universities and think tanks and opera houses. Oh, geez.
Hey, well, you know, you name stuff after capitalists.
Of course.
You're gonna have some baggage is going to come with the name. The Rockefeller Center. Okay, let's talk about John D.
Oh yeah. What do you tell me? What do you think? What do you think about what's going on now about the free speech debate after this whole thing? So we have this quote unquote riot insurrection. What do you think?
If they were censoring, if they were going after misinformation in mainstream media the same way they were going after misinformation in independent media, maybe that might make a difference. I mean, let's make MSNBC not imply that everything is necessarily because terrorism or Russians or
Vladimir Putin is in your bedroom. Oh my God.
Hey, you know, so let's talk about the fact that Vladimir Putin can give the people of Russia health care, whatever his other failings might be.
Oh yeah. Healthcare. Where's our healthcare? In the middle of a global pandemic.
In the middle of a global pandemic.
A year in. Where's our healthcare?
It seems to not be a priority for some reason.
You know, to be honest with you, this really frustrates me. I swear to God, if I was, and I don't even believe it, whatever, swear to whatever. If I was a progressive in Congress, I'd occupy the fucking thing. I'd take handcuff myself to the speaker's podium and say, you're going to have to drag my ass out of here until we pass. Why isn't anybody doing that? I don't understand.
So let's talk about what people tried to do, which was sort of along those lines, force the vote. Let's talk about that. So the math. Math is important. Math is how people add up these numbers that figure out whether something can pass or not.
We need our math badges, like pins that like Andrew Yang had.
The math says that anywhere from 8 to 12 progressives who voted as a bloc would have the final say on any legislation that the Democrats tried to pass out of Congress. They could slap Medicare for all on everything if they wanted as an amendment. We don't hear about anybody talking about anything like that.
Nothing.
We would, in response to force the vote, we got, well, you know, committee positions are important, and a committee position could be more important than an empty vote on Medicare for all that we're going to lose.
Let them eat cake. Or ice cream, designer ice cream in the case of Nancy Pelosi.
So this is where it's important to understand what they do to new freshman Democrats in Congress. I talked about this on a solo show, but it's good to talk about this when there's a guest and more people are probably watching. So what do they do when you first get into Congress as a new freshman Democrat? What do they occupy most of your time with? Do you know?
I assume it's like sit the fuck down, shut the fuck up, and just listen to whatever we say and don't rock the boat. I'm sure
it's so close. It's we're gonna put you in this room, We're going to sit you down in front of this phone, and we're going to make you call to raise money for the DCCC.
I love it.
Now, 40 hours a day. So full-time fundraising for the DCCC from freshman Congress people. And the reason we know this is because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez told The Intercept.
Yikes.
So this is something that the squad themselves let slip to us. It's from them.
40 hours a week of making calls for this multi-billion-dollar organization when people are actually working class people are suffering out there.
Now, so they're making you do that. Now let's talk about what happens when they make you do that. You're raising money for you're collecting tainted money for a corrupt organization.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that in mind, you're collecting tainted money from a corrupt organization.
You're an accessory.
You're already an accessory, and it becomes much harder not to take corrupt money yourself. And even if you don't take any corrupt money yourself, you have become complicit in the DCCC fundraising machine. And even if you stay 100% personally honest, you are more favorably inclined now towards those other members of your party who take that money.
For sure. For sure. It's almost like Stockholm syndrome in a way.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what it is.
It's the whole thing for me. To me, it's sad for multiple reasons, but the primary one is that these people came into Congress, people like Ilhan Omar, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, they came into Congress on the backs of working class people who really felt hope in what they were promising, right? And on organizing from DSA and other organizations that really put a lot of effort. I mean, as a red diaper baby growing up, DSA was this backwater, small organization, having all this stuff going back. Cornel West was the only prominent member that was noteworthy. And basically, in the past 5 years, this organization has exploded in ways that I couldn't even fathom.
Remember that to all intents and purposes, the DSA was essentially dead in like 1977 or 1978 when Jimmy Carter said, go screw yourself to the Democratic agenda. And that was
for sure.
That was Harrington's big attempt to get the DSA involved in Democratic Party politics.
For sure. And another problem with Harrington was that, for those who want to look more into it, Harrington parroted a lot of the U.S. imperialist lines on a lot of issues. For example, the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc, the Global South.
So the thing to remember about American democratic socialists and social democrats in the modern post-World War II era is, and this is for good, for bad. I have the general secretary. I have had the general secretary of the Socialist Equality Party on my old show, and I hope to have him on this show again. So this isn't necessarily criticism, but social democrats and democratic socialists in the Depression, post-World War II era in the U.S. come from a Trotskyist root.
Mm-hmm.
And that Trotskyist root was very much anti-Stalin, even more anti-Brezhnev, who they saw as a fallback to Stalinist positions. And on top of that, came from a specific analysis of a specific class analysis of the Soviet Union that said, rather than calling it a degraded worker state the way Trotsky did, said that, okay, what they've actually done is they've created a new bureaucratic ruling class that has replaced capital in every sense of the word and has taken over the state and made it a bureaucratic state. And so we have a state capitalist bureaucracy that is no better than the Western democracies and might be worse. And that was the beginning of what they called third camp socialism, which was the really...
That was the neither Washington nor Moscow.
Anti-American and aggressively anti-Soviet brand of communism. And that's what Harrington absorbed. That's what Harrington absorbed from Max Schachmann. Yep. And even though they went separate ways and did different things, they both absorbed that same Trotskyist view of three camps, as opposed to not. And it led to weird things. I mean, Harrington was
a lot of weird things.
Harrington was pro-peace movement in Vietnam. Schachmann wanted a negotiated peace treaty. After Schachmann died, Bayard Rustin took over the group that became Social Democrats USA, and they became neoconservatives as far as foreign policy went.
Trotskyists always have an interesting pipeline to neoconservatism.
So there's I get the, and it seems like the foreign policy, people feel like the foreign policy cooperation with reactionaries who are fighting communism is justified if you're helping democratic rights in authoritarian states. And maybe, but you're still compromising with the imperialists to try to spread a very imperialist version of democracy. They're not helping anybody with good intent.
I always say, if you're on the same side as the CIA, probably not the right side to be on. I'm just saying that,
Well, I mean, but it's always, have you ever noticed that there are three kinds of people who end up on the same side as the CIA? The first are the absolute worst people in the world. The second are well-meaning people who have this really black and white, naive, good and evil sense of the U.S. and the rest of the world. That
Samantha Powers
does not conform to reality. Yes, that's a great example. And then the third kind of people who end up involved with the CIA are people who are these folks who just absolutely have no place else to turn. I mean, so let's say you're the...
We have a word for that, opportunism.
Well, let's say you're the Kurds in Rojava. I mean, and the CIA comes along and they say, well, we can help you. What are you going to do? Say no?
I advocated for no while I was there, but
of course. Me. But I mean, that's not what happened. It's like the mountain tribes on the Vietnam, Laos, Cambodian border who felt like they had no option but the CIA. There was nobody else on their side. So when the CIA comes along and says, we'll be on your side, what are they going to do?
I don't know, export more drugs like they did. They were growing a ton of it and exporting it out. And then they come back here as refugees, and it's just... The whole thing for me, I think one of the biggest issues has been US imperialism, and then broader, what we could call like US, EU, NATO imperialism.
Yeah,
just has such a powerful... It's so asymmetric in the world.
Yeah.
So that any resistance, even of a nation state, like you can say, for example, I don't agree with Putin or Bashar al-Assad or Xi Jinping, whatever you want. There are people who can say that legitimately. But you can say that and also say, I don't agree and I won't support U.S. war on Syria or U.S. new Cold War on China. Of course, for me, I say that I critically support these states because, yes, there are negative things. There are also positive things. Many of these states support their leaders. Many of them advocate for independence and self-determination and sovereignty. And who the hell are we to go and dictate to other people?
So let's talk about some of the states that the U.S. has targeted then. Libya, highest standard of living in Africa.
Yeah, Muammar Gaddafi, come on. By the way, he also gave up, but people don't even remember, before the invasion, he had spoken to the Americans and he said, I'll give up everything, all of my nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. Well, I give everything up. I close every program.
And it was because he didn't have that stuff anymore that people felt like they could knock him off.
They did.
I mean, and that was a lesson that the North Koreans and the Iranians were paying attention to.
Of course. We came, we saw, he died.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to end up dead. I don't want my country destroyed.
No wonder Kim Jong-un wants a bomb.
And he's got a lot of them now. Yeah. He's got at least a handful. Oh, yeah. And the U.S. won't mess with him. They know that it would mean the complete destruction of the peninsula and a much broader war. Because if nuclear bombs, you know, if you have all these munitions over there, it's going to hit China.
China's going to get
China's going to get involved. Russia's going to get involved. It has a border there, too. Come on. No, you're absolutely right. It's sad. It's devastating what has been done, but to bring the international to the domestic, which of course is really interesting these days with what's going on. The fact that these progressives who come from this line have not stood up for something so basic that every other industrialized country has is shocking to me. I don't know about you. We are, you know, I grew up in the movement before Occupy, and I remember Occupy vividly. Well, why can't they occupy the Congress? Let's start Occupy Congress. And just, you don't have to...
Well, I don't know. I bet you right now, though, that Occupy Congress would run into military resistance.
Right now, it wouldn't work. But I'm saying even before, when we were doing Force the Vote, I just don't understand why 10, 12 progressives couldn't lock themselves in the chamber and say, we're not leaving, or you're going to have to arrest us to drag us out. What kind of a spectacle? What kind of a news? People would start talking about it.
If 12 of them had just voted for Barbara Lee,
why not?
On every vote, repeatedly, said, we're going to keep voting for Barbara Lee. And they said, no, vote for Nancy Pelosi. And they say, no, put up someone else or we're going to keep voting for Barbara Lee. So there are a few things they can do at that point. They can go get Republican votes, which completely discredits them with their own partisan base. They can put up someone else, which is a win, would have been a win for the progressives no matter what. Even if it's someone objectively worse, like Hakeem Jeffries, that person still knows that their only speaker, because the progressives decided they were going to dump us, they were going to kill a speaker's chances, and that they could do it to them in the future too. And so that would be a win, even if it's not someone better. And hey, if it's someone like Tim Ryan, hey, we all hate Tim Ryan. Who doesn't love to hate Tim Ryan? But his name is on Ro Khanna's temporary UBI bill as a co-sponsor, and who doesn't think it has a better chance of coming onto the floor under Speaker Tim Ryan than under Speaker Pelosi?
Yeah, absolutely. My main issue was they had a lot of leverage. Exactly what the big argument was. They had a tremendous amount of power. A minority in that position can exert tremendous influence in order for the majority to take its helm. I mean, let's take an example. U.S. puppet number one, Israel, right? Likud, when Netanyahu is in power, he has to go to the ultra conservatives to get them on board. So he's always catering to what they want. You want more settlements? Okay. He's going to do it anyway, but now more. Okay, let's do it. You want this? Okay, let's do it. So he gets even more and more reactionary as time goes on. In this sense, we could go more and more progressive. They don't use that power.
No,
and by the way, do you remember that logic? Oh, you know, Force the Vote was said, okay, even if it fails, we get everybody on record. And then they were like, oh no, that's horrible. And then AOC uses the same logic for the Trump impeachment thing.
Exactly.
For all of these things.
And I'll be totally fair and honest. My view on this is completely consistent. I favor Force the Vote, and I favor a vote on Medicare for all, and I favor impeachment for exactly the same reason. They're both the right thing to do. Vote on both of them. But they only vote on impeachment.
Vote, and I have no issue with that. And even if it fails, at least it sets a precedent, and we can build off of it. But by not bringing it, it still remains a pie in the sky dream.
Exactly.
Put it on the floor, put it in the record. I want documentation. I want people to have receipts so they can eventually say, when the next election comes, you didn't vote in the middle of a pandemic for healthcare for the American people. I mean, you can even frame this stuff like the old Communist Party would always frame this stuff as sort of like red patriotism. You'd say, if you really care about the working class in the US, then you would care about giving them healthcare. You can take that logic on its head and make them all of a sudden scramble for talking points. Because you can say to them, you don't care about American workers. You don't care about, farmers in the US because you don't give a shit about their healthcare. You don't care about them being well fed, about their communities, about family values. And the next thing you know, mind melt. What are they going to say? Oh, of course I do. Yeah, but you didn't vote. You didn't help them. You didn't want to give them healthcare in the middle of a pandemic. You can out them that way.
I've been reading some Depression era propaganda.
Oh, it's great.
Schachtman again. And Schachtman writing about Henry Wallace in the 1930s, basically saying, yeah, we all hated the guy before. The guy before was openly corrupt and evil and a scumbag and all this other stuff. And and Henry Wallace is known to be honest and well-meaning, but he still says he wants to make business better. He wants to make agriculture better for business, and he wants to help businesses restore themselves to footing, which means he doesn't want to help us. He wants to help the boss.
Push them.
Yes, it was this very scathing attack on someone who many of us of a younger generation see as sort of an American leftist icon in this sadly right-wing latter generation.
Yeah, of course. And we don't realize how much more progressive society was over there.
Yeah.
At that time, oh my gosh. I mean, the New Deal was really a push from the communists, and we had like worker uprisings and massive strikes and worker occupations and armed conflict with the National Guard and paid goons and lackeys of the businesses.
The Battle of Blair Mountain.
Absolutely. Minneapolis, the Battle of Minneapolis, all that stuff. So for me, when you look at these I call them so-called progressives now because there's absolutely nothing progressive about them, really. It's just progressive imperialism and progressive capitalism. That's what it is. But for me, I'm really shocked and deeply, deeply saddened that so many people have bought into the fact that just because they're in Congress, we shouldn't criticize them. We shouldn't do this. Why aren't we going for the right? Wait a minute. These people represent us, supposedly. If I consider myself on the left and these people consider themselves on the left, you're damn right I'm going to go after their asses more than the right. Fuck the right. We already know we disagree on most everything. But on this situation, absolutely, we should push them. But we were gaslighted. Oh my God. Not only this, you're anti-feminist. You're misogynistic. These horrible slander against us.
So, and isn't every one of those slanders something that by we, I say those of us who supported the Bernie as the compromise idea during the Democratic primary, we heard that before.
Of course.
We heard every one of the arguments made against force the vote and used to attack force the vote advocates during the Democratic primary. It was a total party troll job, just like they hit Bernie with. And yet it's Bernie supporters doing it. It's Bernie supporters who were saying they're so mean to us. No, Bernie bros aren't real during the primary, and are now using the worst Bernie bro tropes against Jimmy Dore and Bree Joy. I mean, going after Brianna Joy Gray the way they have. I mean,
horrible.
I don't care whether you agree with everything.
All that stuff was just disgusting.
I don't care if you agree with everything she says or not. Is there anybody who isn't 100%? I mean, if anybody out there is in good faith, it's her.
It's shocking to me. It's shocking to me that for something so basic that everybody claims is a human right, advocating for it has turned into a huge political liability for a lot of people. And they've not only that, they've said that we're Russia supporters, we're Trump supporters. Are you shitting me? What do you mean? I fly the red flag tomorrow on top of the Capitol if I could. But the thing is that I'm not beholden to the Democratic Party. I've never have been, never will be. You know, the Democratic Party is just the other side of a right-wing corporate state. I don't consider them in any way a vehicle of change. And I don't consider working within them a vehicle of change. In fact, it just was laid bare and naked for everyone to see. Even progressives who run on the Democratic Party ticket cannot go against it. It's that powerful. It is.
And the fact that people were not willing, and now we need to elect more. We need to elect more. Well,
elect more.
This was what we would do if we elected more this time.
We have now more, and they haven't done anything. I don't know what to do. I don't know. It's like waiting for the Messiah, waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. Nothing comes.
So what's the difference between the New Deal and now? Difference between the New Deal and now is, well, you had Norman Thomas in the Socialist Party during the New Deal. Mm-hmm. You had the communists during the New Deal.
Yeah.
You had a very, very, very radical and left-wing and socialist CIO that was directly, whose leaders, A. Philip Randolph and John C. Lewis, were directly associated with the Socialist Party. So they were not even, the unions were not pretending not to be socialists in those days. And it was just, so there was all this pressure to the left, and they had to be more radical than they wanted to be in order to accommodate all that pressure.
Absolutely. And at that time, but radical. We're talking immigrants who had come over, or first generation, and they fought tooth and nail for it. We're now
we're breaking up some. Looks like we're having some technical difficulties, folks. Hopefully they'll clear themselves up in a moment. Go ahead and try to say something.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it sounds like it's good now.
Okay, yeah. Well, living in a rural area, here you go. Basic internet infrastructure is basically non-existent.
Well,
it's pretty crazy.
So I'll tell you a funny story. So I landed my biggest name guest ever, former Congressman Alan Grayson from Florida. Mm-hmm. And we're getting ready to start talking about his War Makes You Poor Act, and his internet goes out. Now this is a guy. We end up doing the show on my cell phone using the computer microphone to amplify our cell phone conversation, because a multi-millionaire congressman who used to run a telecom company had his internet go down during an interview.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the internet, people don't even realize that there's parts of this country that are totally, decades behind in terms of infrastructure.
Oh no, I know.
Yeah, we have plenty of money for F-35s and the new bombs and new weaponry and, going to space, and we're going to colonize Mars. Colonize Mars? We haven't even fixed this fucking planet.
Hey,
where are you going?
We haven't even finished. We haven't even finished making sure the colonists in West Virginia have running water and sewers everywhere.
It's sad. It's sick. I don't even know what to think anymore. I just get more flustered and upset thinking about this. We're going to go export our problems into intergalactic capitalism. There we go. Going to plunder every resource that we can.
Well, I mean, and that's what they want. I mean, so how did modern capitalism start? Modern capitalism started with the age of discovery and the doctrine of discovery and the massive levies of debt, so that explorers could try to find new lands and conquer new empires. So
plundering.
And so let's look at the career of Cortez. David Graeber talks about this in his book Debt. Mm-hmm. Cortez, in order to put together an expedition to invade Mexico, pawned everything he owned and was in debt to the point where he was bleeding debt out of his ears when he snuck out of Puerto Rico to invade Mexico without permission because his permit got revoked at the last minute, essentially. And so he invades Mexico, takes the wealth of the Aztecs by every dirty lowdown trick known to man against the Aztecs, and then proceeds to cheat all his partners and flunkies of their share of the treasure by every underhanded method known to man, and still ends up dying in debt despite having conquered the richest empire in history at that point and sent more gold to Spain than anyone else ever had.
There you have it. The history of debt. That's from the debt. What a history, 5,000-year history.
It's a great book. I mean, a lot of economics just don't actually fit the anthropological and historical record.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of funny that these theories that don't actually conform to what happened are accepted as this origin of our whole economic system, when that's a story that someone made up to justify a specific argument.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Let me ask you, what do you think of the incoming Biden administration? What do you think is going to happen?
So let's talk about Adam Schiff's domestic terrorism bill again.
Here we go.
Because, so if I were somehow involved in the incoming administration, I would not want a generic domestic terrorism bill that massively increases the power of the very government agencies that Attorney General William Barr just proved could be easily hijacked by a rogue attorney general who's in a president's back pocket.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's start there. So who's going to enforce this domestic terrorism policy? Well, the vastly compromised and unreliable federal law enforcement system that has proven that it wasn't even able to decide which side of the election to meddle on in 2016, and ended up essentially, on the one hand, supposedly working to block Trump, but actually electing him.
Mm-hmm.
And if the deep state can't even get its own conspiracies on one page, then what shape is our state really in?
I think, number one, I'm on this new domestic terrorist thing. I'm really, really nervous. Number one, because I of course am on a few of those lists. So
why not? Why not a very specific denazification law targeting white supremacists in law enforcement?
Denazification? Are you shitting me? When we denazified Germany, we employed the vast majority of them to come build our military, to do our Operation Gladio.
I'm suggesting that we should do it right this time. But I mean, if you really thought that our administrative state was the way to solve the white supremacy problem, then wouldn't a very specific, very targeted denazification law along the model of Ulysses S. Grant's Klan laws make more sense than a very general domestic terrorism law that could be used against everyone else but white supremacists if the government really wanted to? Because let's remember, when has the Patriot Act been used against white supremacists, despite Biden having essentially written it because of Timothy McVeigh?
I don't know, many cases. Well, the problem is that if you, for example, look internationally to see what the U.S. does about Nazis, the U.S. arms and supplies Ukrainian Nazis, Azov Battalion, Right Sector. Basically, Ukraine has been turned into Banderistan, like after Stepan Bandera. And
Yeah.
you look at this and you say, uh, oh, first of all, Victoria Nuland is back in the game. She was an architect of that whole, disaster over there. You have
Mhm.
all these. Blinken is going to be Secretary of State, right? You have all of this coming out. First of all, Biden's connections with Ukraine,
Yes.
and you look at this and you say, denazification. We're supporting Nazis abroad. Anything as a bulwark. By the way, the U.S. at the United Nations has voted against the yearly anti-Nazi bill that comes before the General Assembly every time. It has never voted for it.
Well, that's because there's one country that actually, there are two countries actually who do things that fall under the aegis of that Nazi bill, and that's Israel and us.
Exactly. So I couldn't foresee. I could only foresee denazification in a socialist or somehow
and
society.
really, and that's why nobody's talking about it.
Of course not.
I mean, because of course you're right. Our government isn't really particularly anti-Nazi. They never have been.
Of course not.
But that said, I mean, that's the obvious solution if you really expect the administrative state to survive to solve the Nazi problem. And yet,
sure, but
instead of going that route, we're hearing domestic terror bill.
Of course, because who are the real domestic terrorists? BLM, Antifa, all the people who are anti-racist, capitalist.
Because you're a communist, you probably know this, but in the Denver Black Lives Matter protests, the local PLS was heavily
PSL,
the party PSL, yes, sorry. Yeah. Local PSL was heavily involved in those protests, planning, organizing. All 14 of the leaders of their Aurora chapter were arrested.
And 4 are facing very, very heavy and serious felony, charges, which could land them in prison for decades.
And this is before any domestic terrorist act is passed.
Of course. So you can only imagine what will happen at that,
The snatch vans that were running around Portland up here where I lived for a little while, the reason those are legal, which they are, everyone tried to pretend that was illegal.
No, they're legal.
In the news, but it's legal. It's legal under the Patriot Act.
Of course.
Which, of course,
terrorism.
The Democrats in Congress renewed for Trump.
Of course.
Now, you say
Trump was the greatest threat, the greatest existential threat to humanity, but we'll give him more money for his military.
Well, even beyond the military stuff. So I can see this ridiculous institutionalist argument that says we have to fund the military no matter what, because Merca. So I can see that. I can see that. And I can see how you would give even that horrible president this big military increase because you trust the institutions of the military to listen to him where they should and resist him where they should and not really do anything you don't approve of anyway. Because let's face it, there's nobody in Congress who has a problem with any of the imperialism shit.
Oh, of course not. They're all on board.
So with that in mind, they're fine funding all that. Even if it means a war with Iran, they were not terribly hostile to the idea of a war in Iran if it were started by President Biden in 2009. Only in the sense, of course, that they didn't nominate him. So I guess maybe they were hostile. But but that's the sort of thing. I mean, when you see these themes repeat themselves, you just lose all faith in anyone caring about the things they claim to care about.
No, and of course, number one, the main thing is the two-party system is gone. There's no point of change. This new People's Party coming up, or people like myself who are running third party, and vying for that Green Party, whatever it might be, PSL, who ran Gloria La Riva. I think it's amazing. I think it's building, and I think slowly people are realizing the Democratic Party is not capable of transformation of the society. It's not. And I think that the Republicans are also going to split at some point. This Trump movement is not going to be able to, it's going to split at some point. It's going to become its own phenomena.
It's interesting you mentioned the People's Party and the Democratic Party not being able to deliver change. Ryan Grimm of The Intercept was calling out the People's Party for a deliberate attempt to show that the Democratic Party could not limit change, and was saying this was all a plan to make the progressives in Congress in the Democratic Party look bad, and they never even wanted to force the vote. And it was like, no. What it was is they said, we're going to try to force the vote. And if we can't force the vote, we're going to make a whole lot of hay for the People's Party on the fact that they're not listening, which is absolutely the logical thing.
For sure.
Especially since it started out, all the people who took it seriously were People's Party people, and all the people who attacked it in a block were Democratic Party people of some kind.
And it wasn't only People's Party people who supported it. Us communists supported it. I saw a lot of different socialists.
I'm not really affiliated with the People's Party people, except in a generally supportive way. And
as am I. I'm down for a party that is principled, anti-imperialist, and for the working class. Absolutely. We might not agree on everything. We might not agree on history or a lot of issues, but I can certainly get behind some a good part of their messaging. Absolutely. I'm right there, I
mean, I have a friend who firmly espouses what he calls turn signal theory, which basically is that 70% of Americans can't even use their turn signals. So at least until we get to at least half of America using their turn signals, we're probably not going to see a popular uprising.
No, you're absolutely right. We will not see a popular uprising.
And since we won't see a popular uprising until at least half of the people in the country can use their turn signals, we really need to be doing whatever we can to move the needle in electoral politics, even if our main method of influence isn't itself elections.
Right. And that was my biggest argument for running. Everybody said, you're running, you're going to lose. And I said, the point isn't whether you win or lose. The point is to convince people that our ideas are superior to the ideas that have been shoved down their throats for the past generation, 2 generations, 3 generations plus. So, of course, it's not about, oh, I won and now I occupy the seat of power in a system I can't really affect change because the system is so much greater than electoral politics, because there's an entire bureaucratic apparatus beyond what, they can do. The thing is to make a show of it and to actually say, this is what we believe. This is not what they believe. And that's why you should support us, or at least you should raise your consciousness to understand these issues in a new light. And that's important. Nobody else is really doing that out there.
And during the period where the most success towards the social democratic socialist realignment part happened was during that period of the Depression to LBJ, where you have people trying to push the Democratic Party from outside it. When change stops happening is in the 70s, when every single self-proclaimed leftist group out there is in some form sucked into and suborned and becomes part of the Democratic establishment.
And then you have, for example, the Communist Party that's still running, for example, Gus Hall and Angela Davis into the 70s and 80s. But of course, it's much smaller. Anti-communism and McCarthyism has taken a massive toll. We're talking hundreds of thousands of communist members and sympathizers and fellow travelers left, were imprisoned, were exiled, lost their rights, whole bunch of things, not to mention the assassinations that happened. I mean, think about the 60s as a period of 4 assassinations that really froze a lot of progressive politics in the US. We're talking about JFK, Bobby Kennedy, MLK, and Malcolm X.
And those aren't even the only ones.
And those are not the only ones. We're talking about Black Panthers. We're talking
Fred
about
Hampton and
Fred Hampton, of course. So you look at that, and you have to ask yourself, a lot of people froze. A lot of people said, I can't do this, or the risk is too high. And of course, the material conditions changed at that time. You're
Yeah.
talking about much more stable imperial core, much more wealth. People are upward mobility. Now you're not experiencing that. In fact, you're looking out and you're saying people have bachelor's or master's degrees or even PhDs, and they can't. They're flipping burgers. They're serving Starbucks. They're driving for Uber.
I had
You
a
know?
friend. I had a friend who worked in a call center with me, doing tech support for Apple iPhones, who had a master's degree in early childhood education. She was qualified to teach people how to be kindergarten teachers, and she's sitting here working in a call center because there's no money in teaching kindergarten or teaching people how to be kindergarten teachers.
Of course. Of course, look at someone like myself. I aspire to be a community college professor. It'd be my dream. I taught at a community college before. I love it. It's the best change I can do. But I look at that and I say, there are no jobs. They're cutting all tenured faculty. Everything's going to adjuncting, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't even teach because the whole system, like you're saying, the whole system doesn't give a shit about teaching. We need technical schools. Everybody's talking about technical schools. Yeah, but I think philosophy is important. I think history is important. I think all of these different subjects, the comparative literature is important. Nobody cares about that stuff. If you can do coding, we want you. If you can do radiologist, we want you to work shitty hours and shitty wages and to shut the hell up.
Well, so let's talk about liberal arts.
Mm-hmm.
What are liberal arts? Liberal arts is a set of skills for processing, understanding, and functioning in liberal society. If we're going to have a liberal democracy for however long we manage to keep it, everybody should be learning liberal arts because everybody should understand how to function in liberal society. And yet, liberal arts has been almost erased from curriculums and shrunk and devalued and broken down into phonics, as opposed to, no, you want to read these books and understand what they mean, not just sound them out.
Mm-hmm. We've lost a complete understanding of what education is all about. It's not about grades. It's not about who's the first student and who's the last student. It's about cultivating a human. It's about cultivating the new man, the new woman, the new person, the new human, the new comrade. It's about cultivating an individual who can be who can be at the same time a decent human being, a good citizen to their respective polity, and who can go out there and be able to reason and understand complex phenomena that they experience in their daily life and be able to process and understand their historic origins, what they mean, how to interpret them, and debate other people. Our society has completely lost that. Completely.
And that's why Bernie had so much energy while he lasted, because Bernie was essentially just the same thing that Bobby Kennedy was. It was this very simple left liberal populism that said, okay, we can't change all this stuff tomorrow, but we can try to start caring about each other and having this society where we care about each other more than we care about whether companies make money. And we can start to legislate around this.
Mm-hmm.
And this tiny sort of left liberal populism that's a gateway drug to all the good stuff was strangled in the crib by the Democratic Party.
For sure, because they knew its power. They knew what it would grow up to be. Of course, like you said, it's a gateway. It's a gateway to a socialist future. But of course, see, if you give people, if you unleash the wealth of this nation for the working class, can you imagine what people will do? Can you imagine the minds that will open, the doors that will open if you invest, not in the military, but if you invest in education, in healthcare, in childcare? People have more time to spend thinking about things, reading, going to, do to an art show, going to opera. I don't know, all my dreams of a society that has people reading and doing poetry and criticizing and everything.
The one thing I greatly admired about the Soviet Union, chess.
Chess, of course. Of course. I mean, we can say all the negative things, that we want about various societies that have existed and come, but nobody can say a negative thing about how socialist societies in the 20th century and even into the 21st century gave working class people and peasants who a generation or two generations before had lived in serfdom, unleashed them into women becoming physicists, women being the first into space, all this stuff. I mean, they didn't have the material wealth that we have, but God, they had the intellectual wealth that we will never achieve unless we move forward.
Cuba, since we're talking about intellectual wealth that we'll never achieve unless we move forward.
Of course. I mean, my God, think about a country that exports doctors instead of bombs.
A country that exports doctors despite being embargoed by the most powerful country in the world.
Absolutely, a genocidal blockade.
And they may not have any cars newer than 1957, but they, at the same time, they have doctors. They have so many doctors that they can send them all the way around the world, everywhere.
Absolutely. And doctors that are loved by the people that they serve, doctors that do it out of the love. They don't do it for money because doctors don't get paid that much. I think my friend's mom, who's a dentist, gets paid $50 a month in Cuba. Yeah. And you know what she said? When I went, I've been to Cuba 3 times. And when I go there, she always says, I do it not for the money. I do it for the people. I do it to be, and you should see when I was at her house with her son, who's a professor in Marxism at one of the schools there in Matanzas. People would come to the door at 9 o'clock at night, knock on the door, say, I have a toothache. She'd look at them right on the couch, flashlight, everything, take a look, see what's going on. Do you think we could do that here? The dentist lives in a gated community. He calls security and have you arrested.
We used to do that. It was very communist. We didn't call it that. But the town had a doctor, and the town doctor
with his little bag.
By the community. He was given a place to live by the community. He was provided meals by the community. It was a communist system for supporting the doctor, and the doctor would then take care of the community.
That's right. It's not rocket science that. And you actually, the thing is, I talk to a lot of people who are, because of course I'm still in graduate school, so I talk to some people who are in the medical school and who are doing this. And I have some friends who say, I want to be a doctor, not for the money, but I can't find an internship. I can't find this. I can't do this. I can't do that. And I'm thinking to myself, why can't we be in a society where you want to be a doctor? We'll give you everything for free. And then you serve the people after. How wonderful would that be? We'd have an influx of doctors, influx of dentists, influx of all this stuff. People who really want to learn, but can't take out $250,000 in debt. Who maybe can't even, from the earliest stages of education, can't even do all the things that they want to do because of poverty. But you know what? We have a society that the primacy of all of the wealth and everything and all of our means and all of our intellectual labor goes to the military, goes to the financial instruments that govern us, and we don't put it to the most basic human needs. We're a barbaric society. I don't care what we say about any other society, but the truth is we are a society of barbarism, where we really don't care about the average working class American, the average farmer in the United States. We care about Wall Street and the Pentagon and CIA and everybody else. Go fuck yourselves.
The first leader of Canada's National Democratic Party, Tommy Douglas, said that fascism was not some guy in a brown shirt or a green shirt. But that fascism was when a government which saw that ordinary people were trying to use the tools of political democracy to give themselves economic democracy, started to then destroy that political democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're facing now.
Mm-hmm.
And that fascism is bipartisan. It's not something that stops. It accelerated under Trump. Trump admitted he wanted to destroy the administrative state. He said it out loud, or rather Steve Bannon said it out loud for him. But look at the government even before Trump. The government could not function to help Flint.
Oh yeah, of course not. I mean,
when you think about the government,
function to help Katrina, to help New Orleans. Come on.
They ended up doing things like resettling refugees and all this other stuff months later. But the fact that they couldn't do anything at the time was ridiculous. The COVID failure under Trump, blaming COVID on Trump ignores the fact that Mitch and Nancy repeatedly failed to make any sort of functional deal over COVID relief.
Mm-hmm.
They treated in the middle of a global pandemic. It was business as usual for Congress, which means deadlock and not being willing to agree on anything and not wanting the other side to get credit for something. And so this is what we're looking forward to finally answer your question. This is what we're looking forward to with the incoming Biden administration, is we're going to see this attack on really the basics of our democracy continue, and it may become less obvious and more subtle for a little while, but it's not going to stop. It's not going to go away. I think we're having an issue again. Yeah. Yeah, I heard that. And now we're breaking up. Yeah, we're broken up. Let me try again.
Can you hear me?
Now I can, yes. Okay.
Okay. Excellent. I was just going to say that I absolutely agree with you. I think that, this argument to be made that we've always been really a right seat, except for a few.
That period from the 30s to the 60s, from FDR trying to do the New Deal to Lyndon Johnson pushing through the Great Society. But then even while Lyndon Johnson was getting ready to push through the Great Society, he was reading the Moynihan report from Dan that was just a complete backlash against the civil rights movement that he was going to support for a few more years.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this stuff was already being undercut by people in Johnson's administration who would be full-blown neoconservatives by the 80s.
I think that we were already on the move to reaction, especially after Eisenhower in the 50s.
I think its system is telling us that we need to wrap up for the night, sadly.
All right.
Yeah, we were doing pretty good until the end there. Folks, I want to thank you for joining our conversation. We're sorry for the technical difficulties. And Chris Helali joined us tonight. Follow him at Chris Helali on Twitter. And please, we'll tweet at you, and we'll see you next week. This is Chris Richards with the Eclectic Radical. Have a great night. Bye.